Today, we're diving into a really modern problem that, believe it or not, has an incredibly ancient cause. We're going to talk about why your brain sometimes treats your office like a prehistoric jungle, with life or death threats hiding behind every desk. It turns out your brain might be running on some seriously glitchy, old-school software. So let me ask you this. Have you ever opened your inbox, seen a kind of critical email from your boss, and then bam, your heart's pounding, your palms get sweaty, you feel this flush of anxiety, maybe even anger? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. The real question is, why on earth does a simple psychological trigger cause such a massive physical reaction? Well, the answer lies in a fundamental glitch in our wiring. All right, let's get right into it. The main idea here is that our brains are basically running on ancient hardware, but we're living in a totally modern world. And that mismatch, it creates a major glitch in how we see threats. Okay, check this out, because this is the core of the problem. A primitive threat, like a tiger jumping out at you, requires a physical fight or flight response. That makes sense. But a modern threat, like that critical email, that requires cool, rational thought. But here's the glitch. Our brain triggers the exact same fight or flight mechanism for both. It is using the completely wrong tool for the job, pretty much every single time. This crazy mismatch is what a lot of experts call the brain's design flaw. See, our primitive brain just can't tell the difference between a threat to our physical safety and a threat to our social standing. So when it senses a challenge to our self-worth or our place in the group, it interprets that as physical danger. And what does it do? It unleashes this flood of stress hormones that are, let's be honest, completely useless in an office. So what is actually happening inside our heads during these moments? Let's take a look at the biological chain reaction that kicks off when we face a social threat. It's a process that's often called an amygdala hijack. Here's how it all goes down, and it happens fast. First, a social threat is detected. Then, your amygdala, your brain's alarm system, starts blaring. Next, stress hormones flood your system. And here's the most important part. Your rational brain, the thinking part, it gets totally hijacked and just goes completely offline. Now, this specific kind of stress actually has a name. It's called psychosocial stress. It has nothing to do with actual physical danger. It's all about how we perceive threats in our social world. It's what happens when our brain looks at a situation and basically concludes, my status, my self-worth, my place in the tribe is at risk, and I don't think I can handle this. And let's be really clear, this is not a small issue. For a lot of people, this low-grade, constant fight or flight feeling becomes their normal, everyday state. And the result of that? Well, psychosocial stress is now the single biggest cause of illness in the workplace. That's why getting a handle on this is so important. Now, you might be thinking, these threats are all coming from the outside world, right? But a lot of the time, the trigger is actually internal. The whole stress response often kicks off with the questions we are constantly and usually unconsciously asking ourselves. We're always asking ourselves questions just like this one. For our ancient brain, being excluded or disrespected literally meant a threat to survival. If you were kicked out of the tribe, you were on your own. So that's why even just imagining that the answer is yes can be enough to set off the alarm bells. You see, we're constantly running this little social safety scan in the background of our minds. And if you happen to have what's called a negative predicting habit, your brain just defaults to answering no to these questions. That negative self-talk, that little voice in your head, that becomes the trigger that flips the switch on your fight or flight response. Okay, so we've laid out the problem pretty clearly. Our brain's hardware is old, it's out of date. But there's some really good news. While we can't just go in and change the hardware, we can absolutely upgrade the software. It's kind of like it's time to get a user manual for our own brain. I absolutely love this analogy because it's so empowering, right? The primitive fight or flight response, that's the hardware. It's just baked into the system. But our thinking habits, our default reactions, that's the software. And software? Well, software can be updated, it can be rewritten, and it can be improved through something called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And hey, don't let the technical name scare you. Think of CBT less like some formal, complicated therapy and more like a set of really practical skills. It's basically a method for learning how to pay attention to your own thoughts, challenge the ones that aren't helping you, and then consciously reframe them so you can better manage your reactions. So how do we actually do this, right? How do we go from being hijacked by our own brain to being the calm, cool-headed boss of our own mind? Let's get into the how-to. So building this new skill really comes down to 3 steps. First, you just start to notice your thinking. That's it. Become aware of your patterns. Second, you learn to catch that negative self-talk in the act and then reframe it. And third, with practice, and this is the amazing part, you actually build new neural pathways. You literally start to rewire your brain's default response. And this isn't some abstract theory either. These are real concrete techniques. Things like actively stopping a negative thought spiral right in its tracks, or consciously reframing a bad situation to see it in a different light, or even just using simple, long, slow breaths to calm your whole nervous system down. These are all ways you can deliberately choose your response instead of just letting that old default program run the show. So if there's one thing you take away from all of this, let it be this. This is so, so important. Feelings are not facts. Let me say that again. Feelings are not facts. They are just the biology of how your brain is processing the world. That surge of panic you feel over an email, it's a very real feeling, but it isn't necessarily a reflection of reality. It's just a signal from your ancient hardware, and you have the power to double-check it with your modern software. Ultimately, it all comes down to this choice. Every single time you feel that surge of stress, you have an opportunity. Are you going to let your emotional, primitive inner ape take over and run wild? Or are you going to engage your rational brain, use these new skills, and consciously choose a different, better response? The power to decide, well, that's all yours.